Well, good morning. It's a great pleasure to be here today and chair this panel. We're going to look at pharma deal making from both sides, so both the pharma and the biotech side. And we're going to look at questions like, when do you partner? How do you establish traction? How do farmers choose who they partner with? What's behind the shift to new therapy areas? How's AI impacting deal making? How to structure deals that last, and how to manage some of the cultural challenges in having deals. So those are our areas of focus. And I've got a very eminent panel. I'll get them to introduce themselves in a moment, but we have Alessandra Polara, who's Senior Director of Global BD at Roche. We've got Emin, I don't know how to pronounce his name, Fadillioglu. He's a CEO of an even more difficult to pronounce company. You'll do that later. Peter Braun, who's CEO of TargImmune Therapeutics. David Colpman, a director at Alpina Life Science Advisors, and Ulrich Wendt, who's Global Head of Business Development for I&I at Sanofi. So very eminent panel. But first of all, I should probably introduce myself. So I'm Sarah Holland. I'm the Chief Business Officer of an AI-enabled biotech called Cureteq. And we work closely with a sister company called Innoplexus, which actually was the first company in our industry to buy NVIDIA machines. We now all know what those are, but when they bought them, it was just a techie thing. And they've been helping a range of different clients for many years now use AI across the entire value chain, from things like molecular docking studies to indication prioritization and optimizing commercialization and so on. And I think about 3 years ago, they thought it might be a good idea to have their own pipeline. So they're actually based in Frankfurt, but they formed Cureteq, and we're based in Hamm near Zug. And my job is to in-license molecules at late preclinical to early clinical stage, work with Innoplexus to get them to value inflection creatively, cheaply, and quickly. And then, ideally exit. And what we do is we put them into new formed entities, subsidiary companies. So we've just created one called Oncotech around 2 really exciting oncology assets, and we're currently raising Series A for Oncotech. But the reason I've been invited to chair the panel is actually a different hat, which is the voluntary hat as president of the Swiss Healthcare Licensing Group. And if you don't know that group, it's a non-profit industry association for deal makers in Switzerland, but also other countries as well. And we help our community stay up to date on deal trends, deal types, deal skills. We organise, I should talk about our flagship conference. So we have a conference that's over 2.5 days, very inspiring conference that takes place in Montreux at the end of May. So that's our flagship event, and I highly recommend it. But other activities include an initiative for startups. So if you happen to know startups or are in a startup, we have an offering that's extremely well received. We took 30 startups through a series of 4 complimentary free workshops last year to teach them deal-making skills. And they just have to use our magic QR code to apply. So encourage people to get their startups to apply. So having introduced myself, I'll now hand over and ask the panel if you could say a bit about your company and your role at the company. Maybe we just go along.
Uli Wendt, currently responsible for business development immunology at Sanofi. We're a global healthcare leader. We see ourselves as an AI-enabled company, player in the industry more and more, and are striving for leadership in cross-therapeutic areas, strong positioning, neuro, rare, but also increasingly immunology, where we're building, as we think, the leading immunology pipeline in the industry around our blockbuster Dupixent. I'm in the role since 2019 and held different responsibilities in the company before, starting from R&D, commercial, alliance management, and search evaluation. Thanks.
Yeah, David Colpman, good morning, everybody. I'm at Alpina Life Science Advisors, which is a boutique business development advisory group comprising ex-Shire executives. At Shire, I headed business development. I was there for 15 years. Highlights, I guess, were buying a company called TKT, which took Shire into an area which was really unknown at the time, which was orphan drugs, and made Shire, I guess, a world leader in orphan drugs before it was acquired by Takeda. We had a very super busy time. I mean, we grew the company through BD. I remember in my last 18 months, we did 30 deals, including 6 acquisitions. So it was kind of crazy times. More recently, we've been advising biotech companies on exits and out-licensing, and had some notable successes licensing products out for nice big deals to J&J, Bristol Myers Squibb, Novo Nordisk, amongst others.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. Emin Fadillioglu, pretty difficult surname. MD with an MBA background, worked in Abbott for 16 years. I did nutrition, pharma, diagnostic device, all commercial side. I had a chance to run Asia Pacific, Europe, Middle East, Africa in different divisions. Then personal reasons came back to Turkey, 9 years in GSK. My last job was SVP of Emerging Markets Central. Then I wanted to be an entrepreneur and establish a digital healthcare company. My current company invested, and today in Eczacibasi, my role is chairman of digital healthcare company Vital and CEO of Eczacibasi Healthcare. I need to let you know a little bit about Eczacibasi, who we are. That was who I am. A bit closer? Okay. It's a 2 billion euros company, over 2 billion, with 5 different business units. Healthcare is targeting to hit 1 billion by 2028. We have 4 different companies. We have Pharma Commercial, we have CDMO company we acquired from Amgen a year ago. Then we have Pharmaceutical company, and last one is a digital healthcare. We really believe in integrated healthcare services, not only product, but we would like to create an ecosystem where we can provide services as well, and being in the journey of healthcare professionals, every step of their journey of healthcare professionals or patients. And also we are a big believer of deal-making skills are way more important than competing skills in the next 10 years. We don't know everything, but we would like to be the best partner for the right companies to develop further. So that's the summary.
So, good morning, everyone. I don't know if anyone else is as excited that it's actually the 29th of February. Is that anyone's birthday? No?
You know, women.
Oh, that would be really cool. Anyway,
Peter, do you know women can invite men to marry them on this day?
Oh.
I did that to my husband.
Okay. Well, should have thought of that. So I'm Peter Braun, CEO of TargImmune. I'll tell just a couple of words about my background. So was with Roche for over 25 years in a variety of senior leadership roles, global, US, Latin America, Europe. But maybe the most relevant one was I had the privilege of leading the Herceptin team during what was maybe one of the most exciting periods of time, not only for the compound, but also monoclonals in general. Was deeply involved in the development of Perjeta and Qetzala, the 2 sister compounds, and was also involved in due diligences as well because of my role there. I then subsequently stepped out of the big pharma world and into the biotech space, a couple of different roles, and then I came across TargImmune, and TargImmune was fascinating. After having worked for over 30 years in oncology, I was intrigued by the very unique approach that TargImmune has, which is essentially we have a polyplex targeted non-viral vector. You can change out the targeting moiety to deliver nucleic acids to target cells. The first iteration of that is to actually deliver double-stranded RNA to cancer cells. Now, cancer cells actually retain the antiviral defenses that all of our cells actually have, and it triggers a very potent response. The cancer cell, believing it's been infected by a virus, actually then has a very powerful apoptotic effect of the originally targeted cells. Then the cytokine release actually engages the innate and the adaptive immune systems, thus addressing the heterogeneity of the tumor. So super exciting. Clinicians are also eager to get it into the clinic. And in fact, our plans are to enter the clinic before the end of the year. We are in the process of raising our Series B financing. So looking forward to finally getting into humans. So with that, I'll hand over to Alessandra.
Good morning, everyone, and big thank you to all of you attending, Sarah and the fellow panelists. I'm Alessandra Polara. I work at Hoffmann-La in Basel in the partnering department, and I'm very excited to be here today, represent and share more the views of Roche Genentech in the field of business development and challenges of deal making. As so many of you might know, Roche is highly committed to deliver the most groundbreaking science to patients. So we're always investing in R&D, internal and external, and we get very excited when we see compelling data packages. I've been at Roche for about 14 years, starting from R&D, business development about 12 years. My greatest focus has been in oncology, from platform deals to pre-commercial deals, covering a variety of deal frameworks and different areas in the oncology space. We are heavily committed, not just in oncology, but we are heavily invested also in neuroscience, most recently cardiovascular and metabolic, and within a variety of platforms. So I'm looking forward to address your question and help the audience with your questions as well today.
Thanks, Alessandra. I think you can see we've got a very impressive panel here with a lot of deal-making experience. So my first question to you, probably put this one to Uli, is starting at the beginning, when is the best time for a biotech to partner, Uli?
I think it's a hard question to ask, Sarah. And in the end, I'm getting a little closer here. In the end, I think most pharma, including us, are really innovating along the entirety of the pipeline, from early stages to commercial deals. And I think this question, when to partner best, is deeply intertwined with the assets you have, the corporate development strategy you have. How far do you as a biotech, or does a biotech, want to take the asset? What's the best inflection point to partner? Do you see yourself as a research engine? Do you see yourself as a commercial company? Is it something in between, maybe an exit in clinical stages? So I think there's no easy answer, but it's really asset and strategy dependent. And I think pharma is actually, at least as I see it, pretty open to different entry points, provided there is a good phase-adjusted and strong phase-adjusted data package available.
Do you think sometimes it can be tempting to go it alone for a bit too long, and maybe people need to make sure they're not ending up in
You're relating to one of my deeper opinions here. I think there is a certain criticality when biotech takes, or smaller companies take assets into the clinical stage, because what we often see that the step into clinical phases, and specifically into phase 1b and phase 2, comes along with the indication positioning. And that will also shape the selection by positioning an asset in a certain set of indications. You just naturally shape the future positioning, specifically in the view of the IRA now. Secondly, you also shape the positioning vis-a-vis certain buyers, right? Not every buyer will be interested in the same indication scope. So this decision is really key. And I tend to think, specifically in companies who don't have a strong medical office or development office on board, there's actually mistakes being made that can taint the asset. So when I advise biotech, and we advise biotech, we always make the point, there's clear exit points in late preclinical stages, but then going into the early and mid-stage clinic, we advise to really interact with multiple pharma, multiple potential buyers, and think deeply about the right positioning. See a lot of mistakes being made in that area.
So it's key to maintain your optionality. So what about the biotech perspective, Peter? What would you say about this?
I couldn't agree more with what Uli was just saying, because having worked on the pharma side for many years in development, you see mistakes that can very easily be made if you're just aiming for the next inflection point. You actually need to have a clinical development program, not just a clinical trial design. And that program, actually, if you take certain decisions early on, you may actually block yourself and inadvertently reduce enormous value, not just to the shareholders, but also to the eventual impact you could have in the clinic. So what we've been doing is, well, first of all, we have a former colleague of mine who was also at Roche, helped pull together a really integrated development plan for our lead compound as well as others. And we've been sharing that actually with pharma companies extensively over the last 18 months. So initially the response was, oh yeah, actually great. We like your program. Come back when you have clinical data. And like, I just kind of wanted to have an engagement a bit earlier than that. But what's interesting is, and we'll kind of touch on this later, if you're in a pioneering area, a box that doesn't quite yet exist, that temptation for pharma to say, well, let's just kind of reduce the risk and come back when you have clinical data. But what we've actually seen is several pharma companies have actually said, why don't you come back when you have your safety data? Which I think is an interesting reaction, because essentially what those pharma companies are saying is, okay, well, we're willing to take a bit more risk, but we really like your approach because it's novel, it doesn't exist. So, and maybe just as a final comment, we'll probably be discussing pharma and biotech, but each pharma is different and each biotech is different. So when I make those comments, it's each company is different. So.
And maybe I can ask David, I mean, there's also a kind of financing angle to consider about timing of partnering.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can talk about the ideal time to partner, but my reflections in the last 10 years working with biotech is that you're often driven, my clients are often driven to a partnership because they've got a financing issue. And, more than anything, that's what's probably taking them out to the market to perhaps finance a second program, to partner a second program to enable the first program to be developed, or the company's simply running out of cash. I mean, the key thing I would say is if you've got less than a year's cash left, you're in a really difficult position vis-a-vis partnering. I've got a current client with a super hot technology. They've a very, very large company's completed its diligence, very, very interested. But the term sheet that we've got reflects the cash position and the market cap of a company, not the potential of the technology. And I guess our job is to try to get through that by having a competitive process and showing the big pharma that we've got alternatives. But you are really in a weak position if you leave it too long. I think that also I'd say that it depends the area you're in. So we did a whole series of partnerships for Swedish companies at either start of phase 1 or late preclinical, and we got some great deals with, I mentioned earlier, with J&J, with Bristol Myers Squibb, and I guess we were in hot areas. And I think if you had an ADC now, I'd probably be really tempted to try and partner it now rather than wait 2 or 3 years when the market might be different.
Great. So it's a combination of cash, but also taking advantage of what's fashionable at the right moment.
I think so.
Yeah. So moving on then, how hard is it for biotechs to actually establish traction and get in contact with the right people in pharma? It can be a bit of a black box. Peter, what's your experience?
Yeah, and again, each company is different, but yeah, finding the right person or set of persons is more challenging than I thought it would be. Because sometimes it's the initial contact comes through R&D. Other times it's through the BD function, et cetera. And even the functions mean different things in companies. BD in one company may have a deeper scientific knowledge set just embedded in the team and relies less on the R&D. And other companies, they actually serve as simply the interface, and there's not that depth of knowledge. So trying to figure that out has been at times challenging. Events like this are key, because then you can have very quick conversations, which Zooms just simply do not allow. So yeah, and then maybe a bit of reflection in terms of managing those relationships. Sarah and I, we were kind of joking yesterday about what those relations, an analogy to those relationships, and one thing that I came to the conclusion of is it's a bit like dating, but dating one person is easy. Dating a collective group can be extremely challenging. So it's been an interesting approach. Maybe as a final comment, if you're coming from a big pharma organization from which you then came from yourself, the temptation is to reach out to all of your old colleagues, and that can sometimes be counterproductive. So be careful with those types of approaches, and be respectful of how the organization would like to manage those relationships. Otherwise, you can make a big mess of it.
Thank you, Peter. And David, you've also had experience of helping biotech clients get in touch with pharma.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's a little bit of psychology here. So, when I worked in licensing acquisition side, I know from my own experience that BD people they just want to do deals, right? So they want to build their CV, they want to build up their portfolio of deals, and you know, you need to make it easy for them. So I think that you know, the classic sort of story is, you know, going through the BD route, going through the scientific licensing people. Absolutely, you should do that. But if you can find your own scientific champion within a company, if you can go to medical conferences and they can advocate for you, you're doing the BD person's job for them in that they've already found their internal champion. You'll also hear, and probably some of my colleagues will say, you know, be limited in your approach. I'd say don't care too much about the internal politics in the company you're targeting. You know, it used to drive me nuts at Shire when people went to the CEO, but do you know what? We took those inbounds very seriously. So I wouldn't be too constrained in who you talk to if you've got a company you think should be your right partner.
And Emin, you mentioned that partnering is key to, particularly in digital health. So what's your experience of, sorry, my voice is going. What's your experience with digital health partnering?
I mean, I think digital health or pharma or biotech, in the base of the approach of having an access to the right people, are similar. You know, there are traditional ways of external mapping, internal discipline, to ownership, etc., execution. But we decided to try something else as well, in a non-traditional way. So number one, through our digital healthcare company, we have different offerings for hospitals, for pharma companies, for even non-pharma companies. So through those offerings, once you have a partnership or service partner of this company, for any reason, could be a clinical trial, could be employee well-being program, then you have a completely different set of relationship and different set of communication. You can not only see, but also smell who is the right person, who is the right path within the company. The second way is, together with our chief investment officer, what we decided to do to invest the healthcare funds. So there are certain funds we invest, and then we can reach fund companies through those investments. You know, possibilities of sitting in the board, possibilities of interacting, finding the right partnership models, etc. So those two doesn't only increase the way of access, but also depth of access. So that's what we are trying to do. And one last point, a little bit soft side of it, a profile of decision maker is also very, very critical. You know, some profiles you shouldn't go direct. You know, the art of deal making also needs to be part of this access process, I believe.
Some creative ideas there, thank you. So going to pharma then, so we talked about how biotech establishes traction and some of the challenges. Uli, how do you like to be approached? What do you think? If someone wanted to approach Sanofi, how should they go about it?
I'm personally not over prescriptive on that. I'm actually a little bit with David here to say, you know, if any entity, academic, biotech, has a, yeah, thanks, Sarah. You know, if you have strong ties into the company, I don't think we need to be prescriptive in what way an innovator approaches our company. I rather try to lobby in the company to be open to innovators coming with us in decent ways. But of course, that also means people, it's better if people stay decent and accept a no. And there's rare cases where that doesn't happen. But in normal bounds, I think it's really an open game, and we should encourage an open game for people approaching us. What I would recommend is to build the business track and the R&D track in parallel. As you said before, if you have a scientific champion early on, it's always very helpful. No.
And what about for Roche, Alessandra?
So I think we connect with the external world in three ways. We do have an established network of investors and company that we regularly talk to. There's a large amount of companies that reach out to us in terms of these events, the Bio-Internationals, and also on our website. There's a page dedicated to biotechs and companies that want to partner with us, and we do triage all those requests. We are also proactive. We like to be proactive in reaching out to companies, and especially when we know that certain data is going to be disclosed. In terms of recommendations of advice from our standpoint, what makes a connection works best. From a strategic perspective, a biotech that has clarity on their exit strategy, on their narrative, on the data, and also what kind of phenotype of partner they're looking for. Are they looking for a regional partner or a global partner? What kind of expertise you're looking for? So having that clarity, I think, helps a lot in terms of communication. From a tactical standpoint, some advice I would like to give is, first of all, curate your narrative and curate your data package. And this is something, and advice also to the investors. Make sure that your companies, that sometimes are earlier startups, come from academia. Create a branding that is clean, that is inspires trust, that is based on clear data, timelines, what's your plan to generate next data, and also what kind of exit you're looking for. And I know that sometimes it's hard to know what exit you would like to have. In terms of contacting companies, I think, as Peter, you said, you can reach out to several of us, but it always lands in one spot. And so sometimes when you do an outreach, it's not well perceived, but I completely do understand the feeling that you have a black box and you don't know whom to reach out. So scientific champion and BD champion are really important.
And maybe you can give us a little bit of a feeling for how long it might take to do a deal with Roche.
It depends. It depends if it's a platform deal, if it's a lead identification asset or a pre-commercial asset. So that depends on the complexity of the terms and the size of the data room. So if we need to go through patient-level data for a phase 3 trial, it's different. So to answer your question, it can go from 4 months, super fast, early, to go up to a year. There's been cases we've been in due diligence and negotiation for a year, and we ended up terminating. What helps here, again, well-built data rooms. And also what I think helps is having clarity on what data package you can give, and ask the big pharma, what's the data package you need to see in order to trigger interest? And this is a question that I advise all the biotechs to ask to us. And sometimes it's not easy for us, but it gives you an idea of what kind of data you need to generate in the clinic and in the laboratory, and how you can invest and what triggers interest.
And I remember when I was at Roche, I'd probably known the company. By the time we did a deal, we'd probably known them for at least 2 years, because there'd been this kind of flirting, dating process before you got into the serious deal making. So there's also that relationship building, isn't there, and establishing awareness.
It takes patience, and I think this is again the black box. You send your opportunity to this big pharma, and you're not hearing back. And I do understand it. It gives anxiety, especially if you're running out of cash. And so we have to be, even if we work with several thousand of companies, we need to have this sense of empathy, I would like to say, that you're dealing with companies that have investors, there's pressure, the market hasn't been very favorable. And so we try our best to get back to everybody, but sometimes it's challenges, and we have a large organization. And even if you have a scientific champion, you need to put several governance champions in a row. Mm-hmm. So patience is important. And as you said, Sarah, sometimes it can take 2 years of conversation while the data is maturing.
And maybe I can go back to Uli, because I know you've done some pretty impressive, courageous deals. For example, the Chimera degrader one. So how difficult is it to do something that's, really kind of groundbreaking in the industry?
Well, I think it's about strategic alignment, right? First of all, I think our role, and you would probably agree with me, is to a significant extent to work with the innovators on the outside, but then also generate, hopefully early in the deal process, deep strategic alignment with senior management and all levels of the company inside. So when you can have that early in the deal, a lot can happen. Yeah, but that's really my experience. the bigger the step and the more risky the step, the more important to have alignment early on. And what I advise along the same lines, I mean, interrogate us. When you work with us, just ask about alignment. Ask who's involved. How do you do this? We're generally relatively open to say where we stand in our internal alignment to the extent possible. And to the comment before, I would also advise to just speak to deal timelines, speak to finance requirements. Let's engage in a discussion on what's needed for the innovator. So that, I mean, as we have a little heavier administrative burden from time to time, we need to understand what the timeline requirements are. And I think things can actually be very fast if alignment is good.
And how important is the team and that you're going to be working with? Is that an important factor for you?
The biotech team, hugely important. Hugely important. I mean, the saying out there is right that investors look at the team a lot. We look at the team a lot too. I mean, we're trying to be very careful to see in the deal process who are the people, who's the team, who's also the culture of the company we're working with, and is that a good fit?
So maybe
and especially on deals where we need to co-innovate. I mean, a clean asset licensing or acquisition is a different animal, but an earlier stage deal where you co-innovate, I think both sides want to be sure that the relationship will work.
I used to put the scientists together and they'd fall in love and then it would all happen after that. So maybe I can move on to talk about therapy areas. I'm focusing a bit on pharma here, but I think this is interesting. And Alessandra, I'm also looking for assets in oncology, and I find myself kind of overwhelmed by how many immuno-oncology companies there are. How do you, as a farmer, decide who to prioritize? How do you look at a field like that and make decisions?
So for this question, I connected with our R&D experts to do evaluations in cancer immunotherapy, and we both agree that it is challenging because at a preclinical level, the models are not very predictive. Therefore, you need a clinical experiment. And it is not easy to get tumor biopsies pre and post treatment. The way to see if a tumor microenvironment is turning from cold to hot is to get a pre and post treatment biopsy. And for several types of cancers and several oncologists and patients and centers, this is something really hard. So PBMCs is one way. Biomarker data, blood tumor samples are important. The advice I can give is invest in a solid phase 1 data package. And this can be challenging because investments are shifting more towards clinical stage assets. For several companies, this clinical stage, it's a black box. I've been advising an old term partner and they're moving into the clinic and you don't know which investigators. Also, the contract with the sites can be challenging, the data IP. So this can be challenging. However, it is important to, when you meet the partners at this conference, ask them what kind of biomarker data makes you excited. What do you expect to see? Go to invest in phase 1s that are solid with reputable investigators and give you solid responses. So this.
Thank you. And maybe Peter, as an immuno-oncology biotech, that's a big ask, isn't it? I mean, with the FDA Optimus guidance and so on, you're talking about a big investment to get everything that Alessandra just described.
Absolutely. And actually, even just the term immuno-oncology, because that's something that we struggle with. Because we are creating a new modality, there is the component of immuno-oncology in there, but we're often put into that box. And we don't fit into that box quite squarely. There is another element to it, which, granted, also increases risk. So, but to the comment in terms of the new requirements from the FDA and what pharma expects as well, that of course it's a systemic issue, whether it's a biotech or a big pharma, that those things just need to be done. Now, of course, the challenge from the biotech side is you need to finance that somehow, which, coming to David's comment earlier, that then drives trying to come to some form of a deal with pharma could potentially alleviate that. But then we're in kind of like a catch-22 where the expectation is you have this data, but to get that data, you need to have financing. And so how to break that circle? And I think that's where the creativity in deal making comes in, as well as transparency with the two sides in terms of where are you and why is it that you might not have this data or that data. And then as a final comment, one thing that we've experienced at TargImmune is when approaching big pharma, granted, they have to actually process and evaluate hundreds, if not thousands of companies in a year. So there has to be a process. But because, again, if you're a pioneer, you don't have an ADC or whatever, we sometimes get the perception that there's these boxes that just need to be ticked. And sometimes the boxes just don't make sense for a nanoparticle or whatever. And the only way we can really share that is to have a CDA in place or whatever. But unless those boxes are ticked, you can't put a CDA in place. So it's again a catch-22. And if anything, the companies that we've engaged with best are the ones that really truly have that curiosity, the scientific curiosity, not just with the researchers, but also in BD, and answering questions in different ways, using different experiments or contextualizing things. So I think it's been an interesting journey, and we'll get there. So
thanks, Peter. And I think what we're seeing is maybe oncology deal making is still the most important area, but it probably did peak around 2022. We're now seeing a quite noticeable shift to other areas. And Uli, we've seen quite a shift to I&I, quite a lot of deals lately. So what do you think is behind that? Why is the industry moving away from oncology perhaps and more towards these new areas?
Rather leave it, Alessandra, to you to comment on oncology with more expertise. I think we're seeing it. I think we're all seeing a relatively massive capital inflow over the last year and a half, not only into I&I, but more into mass market, broad indication therapies like I&I, but also the emerging field of metabolism, obesity, cardiovascular, even with a whole set of new innovations coming up. So I think that's an exciting shift. Yeah? Valuations are very high, specifically in the last year, I think driven probably by multiple aspects, right? Speaking for my area, I&I, there's a limited set of very high value, well-credentialed assets, specifically in the clinical stages that can just achieve high price points. And I think beyond that in the industry, we're also seeing, a wave of loss of exclusivity events coming up and patent cliffs that are probably also driving valuations. So I think, yes, in metabolism, in I&I, we've seen very high valuations recently. We're going to be curious to see how that goes forward.
And do you think it's these huge loss of exclusivity challenges that are leading people into new therapy areas because they've got more life cycle potential, could deliver bigger brands? Is that...
I think you put me a little bit on the spot here. We're actually luckily to be one of the organizations with, at least in the years coming, in the soon to come years, with a little bit less of patent cliff challenges and some of the other players. I think it's multiple factors, right? I think we're seeing a factor, a shift out of oncology, and Alessandra, you may want to comment, to a certain extent, and a shift into asset spaces where we have the combination, of sparsity of credible assets, of very credible assets, and strong buyer interest.
And David, you look after companies across multiple therapy areas. So are you seeing this shift away from oncology and more towards other disease areas, would you say?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think there's, if I think back, I've been doing this job a long time, back to the 90s, there were more drugs in development for oncology than everything else put together. And I suspect it's true today. And there's a lot of interest out there still for oncology. So I don't think there's, I think there's still really strong interest. Is there interest in other areas? Absolutely. And I think that, what drove us at Shire was, it sounds really pat, but we were focused on meeting patients' needs. And, if I go back, go back 20 years, that's when we bought TKT that took Shire into this very strange world of orphan drugs. And the perceived wisdom was there were no patients and pharma couldn't charge this much money for a pharmaceutical. And, 20 years on, we've come almost full circle now. So, people are saying, look, there's unmet need in these big disease areas, in these cardiometabolic disease areas, in these autoimmune, in women's health, right? So I was on the board of a women's health company, and we had a project for endometriosis. There was one buyer for that project, which was Organon, a spin out from Merck. But a huge disease. So it's I think you've got to look at where there's unmet need, and that's where we should be driving our BD strategies and R&D strategies from.
Thank you. And maybe thinking about modalities as well. Emin, I know one of the areas that's been hot lately, and I'm not using that. I'm not trying to pun, but it has been radiopharma. So, you have an involvement in radiopharma? Have you noticed a new sort of trend towards exploring that area, and what's your experience?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a long-term pharma guy, newly engaged with the radiopharmaceuticals. There are certain major differences versus pharma and radiopharm, because first of all, in the traditional pharma, we see quite the often vertical integration, from API to commercialization. And it could be different, of course, in the biotech, etc. But here in radiopharm, vertical integration is very limited. Drug developers, isotope developers, CMOs, CDMOs have to work pretty integrated with each other. Here, partnership is not important. Partnership is vital. Almost all the companies are trying to find their way to vertically integrate their model, but I believe it's going to take quite a long time. Some can be more successful, especially within our big pharma into this category. I think we're going to be seeing quite important changes, bringing their BD R&D capabilities, which way more greater than radiopharm. Will also have an impact in this territory. One, I don't know how audience are engaged with this radiopharmaceutical, but one very important part of this category is it's a very supply chain dependent business, because the half-lives are dropping very quickly, very short shelf lives, and every second counts. In every minute, the activity of the isotopes drops. So it's an extremely supply driven. So having a good supply strategy also critical. But in terms of engagement models or number of the deals, I think it's more intense than pharma, because not hundreds of players, limited players. Everybody knows each other. Everybody knows where they are leading into. Level of confidentiality is definition of confidentiality is different in radiopharm than big pharma.
You can pick it up on the Geiger counter. Yeah. So, David, you're also on the board of a radiopharma company, I think. Is that correct?
Yes, I am, a Swedish one. I mean, the struggle we found, at least in initial talks with pharma, is the supply of the radioisotopes. So maybe this is the answer. And in fact, earlier on in my career, I licensed another radiopharm to J&J, and they've reported back that supply issues that you're talking about, Emin, are a key kind of consideration for them taking forward. So, we've been thinking of pivoting to ADCs and away from radiopharmaceuticals, just because of this whole supply issue since Russia has become unavailable. But I don't know.
ADCs are also a hot topic, Alessandra. Is Roche?
Indeed, they are
Pursuing it.
Question: we've been invested in ADCs for a long time with the R&D group at Genentech, with Kadcyla, and there is ongoing efforts right now to look at next generation ADCs, and we've been monitoring the field quite closely. And as you mentioned, targeted radiopharmaceuticals are really exciting. However, yes, they do pose some manufacturing challenges and deliveries to clinical sites. That it's something that hopefully can be ungated as technical issues, like we also seen like advancements for CAR T technologies. So with the passing of the years, this is going to be improved, hopefully. And to Uli's comment, you called me out a couple of times. Yes, the oncology space, likely for patients, has a really high bar at the moment in the clinic. There's great drugs out there. There's patent cliffs coming, and pharmas need to maintain a sustainable growth. So it's an interesting thing to see. And I think with obesity, we saw unbreaking science with the GLP-1 target. So luckily science is moving. So that's my comment.
And maybe I can move on to another hot topic. And this is something that Sanofi's been quite heavily involved in, but I can ask the whole panel. What's your impression of the impact of AI on deal making?
Well, speaking for us, we're quite courageous in the field. Our senior leadership speaking to it, the organization speaking to it. We're pushing ahead. Like many in the industry, but courageously with significant internal resources and change mandates across the organization, from IA through R&D, through actually portfolio management, where we build our own portfolio management tools in collaboration with a small company and to improve on that front. So we think AI is going to be in the pharmaceutical industry, a key tool. And we've partnered extensively to accelerate the early process. You've seen our deals with Excentia, Atomwise, and Silico in small molecule, large molecule lead optimization. We've partnered for clinical data with Okin, with a smaller company in Israel, Cytoreason. So we're very active in that field and actually have seen that this is moving us forward rapidly and constructively, but still a lot to be learned.
And Alessandra, what's it like trying to do due diligence and AI offering?
Having personally done diligence and deals with AI, it is challenging. It's a black box. It's how do you do diligence an algorithm, especially if you don't have internal capabilities. And then the other challenge is that are your databases clean and ordered enough to be submitted? And do you trust the company to submit all your databases? And at collaboration level, if you do an R&D collaboration for designing new molecules, for example, even if from a BD standpoint, you craft terms that incentivize collaboration between the external team and your drug and your scientists in the lab, you end up finding competition. We are competing against machines, and sometimes you end up in challenging situations. So what I think we're heavily invested at Genentech in AI. The way we've gone through it with Aviv Rajev, that's always been invested in machine learning, is that we have built some internal expertise and we have augmented it with reputable partners such as NVIDIA, where we have recently signed a collaboration. So that's the way we're going, is that. I'm not sure if it's going to lead to new blockbusters, but it's been quite challenging. But again, it is a field that is evolving, and it's really exciting to see how it's moving.
I'm conscious we're running out of time, but we haven't really talked about deal structuring yet. And there's always a conflict between the goals of a biotech and particularly their investors and the pharma. One side might prefer an exit, one side might prefer to de-risk and partner. David, do you have thoughts about that in terms of trying to help the clients navigate those different constraints and desires?
Yeah, look, I think that again, from a client's point of view, if you're a one asset company, I think that the investor's always going to want an exit, and it's very, very difficult to do a license if you just have some sort of shell company left behind. And I think that I think pharma understand that. I don't know how it's working at the moment at Roche and Sanofi, but I think when you split out in BD, if you have the guy who's negotiating a deal and it turns from a license into an acquisition, and that person loses control of the deal because it goes over to another group, I kind of think that's not a great structure to have. I think that you need to have one focused person, whether it's M&A or licensing. And given the structures of the deals are so similar anyway, in that you're still going to have milestones and buyouts, etc., then I just advocate for that. And from a pharma point of view, I understand from an investor's perspective, if it's a one asset company, really, it has to be M&A.
And Uli, we've seen some quite interesting things happening with Sanofi, for example, a buy and spin type model. And what's your view in terms of the conflict potentially between M&A and partnering, or how do you solve that?
Yeah, I can't really follow on the conflict. I mean, in the essence, I think I believe and we believe, if the parties want to get together, the asset is the right asset, and the valuation is agreed and reasonable, I think structural topics are generally solved, and there's massive set of structures. Look at our Inhibrx deal, where essentially the team spun out, in new code, taking parts of the asset that were not in Inhibrx 101. Yeah, look, and then last year, our the development cost profit sharing transaction was Teva in a field, we have phase 2 asset in IBD where others acquired. Yeah, so I think really it's the question is, which is the right asset? Do you come to a common valuation? And then I think structure can just be built around the joint needs.
And having seen the Chimera IPO, even a partnership could actually enable an exit in a way.
Yeah, Chimera was actually very successful. For Chimera, we had exactly the question when we took the Chimera as a multi-asset deal, if you read the press release. But the front runner, we essentially took their front runner at that time under a licensing agreement and actually worked together with them. And they've been extremely smart in how they played the equity story around that and pulled off the most successful biotech IPO of the year on the back of a licensing deal on the front runner. So honestly, I think structure is truly important for the biotech partner, but shouldn't be overestimated as a hurdle.
Yeah. I'm conscious we've only got a few minutes left. Are there any burning questions in the audience that I should take? No?
One in the back.
One at the back.
This may not be burning, but it's interesting.
So we've got a question.
The representative from Roche to give us a bit more context about what a next generation ADC is. Are we looking at better linkers?
There's so much I can't disclose, so pardon me if I'm not too detailed, but I think there's if you look, going to talk in general. If you look at the ADC field, I think what Daiichi Sankyo has engaged is the linker technology and the toxin at a point where ADCs were thought to be dead. So one thing I want to flag to everybody, in 11, we thought cancer immunotherapy was pretty much dead. And I think in 15, we thought ADCs were pretty much done. So I think a big takeaway I would like to give to everybody is like, science is always moving. In terms of ADCs, let's go back. You have a targeting moiety, you have linker, and you have toxin. And you have certain targets that are pretty much clear to be minimal ADC targets. So I think there's different level of permutations that you can do. I think at toxin level, I think we need to understand, are there just, is it topo the only one? Is the topo the best one for lung cancer? How else you can do? You can have oligonucleotide, you can deliver radiotherapy, you can deliver degraders. And the linker, what is the pH of the tumor microenvironment? You have bystander effect. Do all the tumors need it? And I think in terms of antibody, need to use an antibody, or there's a protein ligand? You need a bispecific. So there you have all these different permutations, and it's really interesting to see a lot of investment in the field and a lot of companies that are doing in a systematic approach, and I believe there's going to be more engaging in the technology, and I hope this helps, even if
it's not a simple answer is the answer, I think. I'm conscious that we've got like less than a minute left, so maybe I should I draw it to a close rather than... there's one more question.
Alessandra, so 3 years ago, you've been working very diligently and productively with your colleagues during COVID epidemics for viral, right? So I'd like to wonder what's the commitment of Roche to virology at this time, and specifically to quality, so can you share that?
We have been very involved with on the diagnostic front with the testing, and I think the Roche testing has been a great support during the COVID time, and we had a collaboration with Regeneron in terms of manufacturing. At the moment, virology, it is still one of our areas where we monitor, but we are is not one of our number one priority for investment, but it's something that we're still invested.
And if you have more questions, I think you can grab the panel afterwards. I'd like to say thank you for a very stimulating discussion. I really appreciate all the input and enjoyed it. Thank you.